Okay, I think we're live. There's always this notification that there's an error, but usually it's working. So we're here today with my good friend, Zach. We've known Zach for a long time. He's a relationship coach. And on his profile, I came across a 2-minute video recently because Zach is doing like a series with, I don't know, 2-minute mind-blowing insights. And that video, it did actually blow my mind. And that's why I invited Zach today to talk a little bit more about that. Zach, what you talked about was a dynamic that either it hit really close to home for me or it finally made me see things differently. And you pointed out the difference between an immature person, a wounded person, and a narcissistic person. So can you tell us how you came up with that? How did you think to just summarize it so well and make a 2-minute video about that?
Yeah. So I initially start with the idea of defensive behavior because I feel like I want to tackle maybe some generic problems that pop up in relationships. And I think like, why is my partner so defensive is like a big one that happens in a lot of relationships. So what I do is this little self-exploration about how I want to go about creating the most concise and digestible like way of describing this. So it was something that actually just came to me as I was making the video. This wasn't like a flow chart I had mapped prior. But I was thinking about like, there's different types of defensive behavior and in relationships, depending on a type of person. So I started to explore what they were, and I came up with those 3 components. So, you know, anytime that someone's expressing defensive behavior, unless someone would like to come up with another, I generally find that it's those 3, which is you're either someone's immature, someone is wounded, or someone is narcissistic. And the idea is that an immature person can't really take responsibility for their actions. And so their defensiveness is just very egoic. You know, they can't sit in the discomfort of being wrong. If a person's wounded, their defensiveness is like a contraction, which is a safety mechanism, a lot like kind of like a turtle going in its shell. And then like a narcissist, when they get defensive, will like redirect and deflect responsibility entirely onto you. So yeah, and these things can be extremely like difficult to understand because they're rooted there and not necessarily have to do with exactly what's going on. So it's important to know like which type your partner is expressing.
Right. Yeah, and exactly what you're saying. It's not that easy to understand and wrap your mind around, but that's why I really liked your video because it kind of boiled it down to a framework that, it finally made sense. Now, especially when it comes to, you know, people talking about relationships and toxic relationships and stuff like that, narcissism comes up a lot. And it's coming up so often that I was like, stop it. Stop calling everybody a narcissist who's not in line with you, because that's exactly narcissistic behavior. And what I like there too, what you pointed out, is how immaturity combined with woundedness essentially creates a narcissist, right?
Yeah. And the crazy thing is my experience is that it took me some time to realize, but a few years ago, I came to this realization that in some portion of my life, in my mid-20s, I was actually expressing narcissistic behavior. And I realized that it was like a sliding scale. It's not like you either are or aren't. It's like, to what degree are you expressing the, you know, attributes of one? And so there were ways in which I was very emotionally dismissive. I would deflect responsibility, and I didn't even realize that was happening. And so a lot of the ways that I talk about it come from the fact that I was kind of in the dynamic and didn't really understand it for a period of time. And so I take full ownership of that, you know, and I'm willing to like express that, you know, I've got a pretty deep sense of knowledge about it due to the fact that I was convinced that, you know, I was one to a degree. But you're right, there's a watered down thing happening right now where people are just like, you're a narcissist, or like they like claim, they make this claim about that when it is kind of a very specific and kind of hard to detect sort of behavior that people can express. But there's, I think, a few key points that I might express right now if you would desire. About perhaps
yeah, please go ahead. Super interesting. I see people are watching too. It's actually a very popular one today.
Yeah. So one of the big things which I said in the video is kind of like, if you want to know if you're dealing with a narcissist, you can kind of confront them about their defensive behavior. And so one of the things is that you'll like leave that conversation feeling like you did something wrong. That they're going to be like, well, you're super defensive. Well, you make me feel this way. And honestly, you coming to me about this is the reason why we're having so many problems. So it's an entire deflection of your reality, a complete dismission of it. And instead they're forcing you, they're like deflecting it and making you feel like the bad guy for expressing your emotions. So it's interesting because the ability to reframe a situation is used both by healers, like trauma healing, by reframing experiences, but it's also used by narcissists. It's a tool of, yeah. And so it's a weird thing. And I think that's why some people can have like kind of a hard time understanding, because you would say that your gurus and your narcissists both reframe very well. Because people who have the like ability to say like, yeah, this happened to me, but you know what? I'm going to take it and transform this story into a more empowering way. I'm going to take this responsibility, or I'm going to, yeah, it's like your trauma or your pain becomes your stepping stone, you know, becomes your medicine and your gift, your ability to reframe a situation. But yeah, narcissists do the same thing. So they can completely be like, well, the way you see the world is not real. And in fact, it's this way. So you have to, it's a sharp tool.
and that's great how you said that just now. The way you see the world is not real. And I think that's why relationships, you know, be it romantic relationships or friendships as well, they're such a good tool for exploring the self and the world, the universe, the reality, right? Because in that crossover of different perspectives, we learn so much. And actually, with your framework, I'm imagining it kind of like the immature person versus the wounded person, and then the intersection of those, the narcissistic one. But if I take that actually layer deeper here, and I open up what you would describe as a spectrum for narcissists, right? We're really quick to label someone a narcissist, which is technically speaking like a psychology type of term, almost like sociopath or psychopath, right?
Or bipolar, yeah.
Right, something like that, where to me, it crosses the threshold of this person is a bad and evil person, right? Whereas on the flip side, it's, well, this person just hasn't learned certain things, or they were wounded in the past, right? And so in that spectrum, that's interesting as well. And then when it comes to taking responsibility, though, and looking at the world and reflecting on what is real and everything, how do you make sure you yourself don't get trapped in this? If you're constantly on a mission to, you know, live your best life, it is a very egoic process. It is very much about making your dreams a reality, but then the other person's dreams come in as well, right? So that, have you ever, I don't know, as a coach, have you experienced that, where you maybe talked to both people and they were both just quote unquote narcissists fighting each other at all? Or what would you say to that?
Yeah, so I would say two things. The first thing is, if you're willing to Google, how can I tell if I'm a narcissist? You're already lowering yourself on the spectrum. You're already being open. You're like, okay, how can I accept more of what I'm potentially receiving? So like what happened with me was that I Googled that at some point, because someone, you know, was accusing me of being that. And this was like an ex-partner of mine. And I was like, I just, what? You know, I was so confused. And so as I was Googling it, that was one theme that came up, is if you're here reading this, you're probably not fully one, or at least you're on the best path of like recovery. So being open to understanding what it means and how you might be expressing the tendencies of one is like the first important step. And then like the big meat of the entire thing is emotional intelligence. So just having a capacity to understand and relate to emotions is one of the best courses of like correction with these types of, you know, with narcissistic expression. So, you know, because when someone's expressing something about the reality, like there's the reality component, which you can see as wrong, but it doesn't matter, because what's happening is it's evoking an emotion inside of them. And the emotion is the important part. Connect to the emotion, sense the emotion, and like learn to be with the emotion, because that's the component that is really causing, you know, the disharmony or the disagreement. So if you start to like learn about emotional intelligence, it will like naturally cause you to fall off of that spectrum of behavior.
And I think especially with that, at least from my experience, I'm not sure, you know, sometimes it's like knowing if you possess this intelligence yet or not is difficult to tell. But I've noticed that it can be one thing to recognize one's own emotion, and the other thing to recognize without project or interpret someone else's emotions. So just, letting someone else express their emotions and not label them as wrong, but holding space for somebody's emotions and comparing them to your own. And then in that, challenging thing, which is, emotions are not of the logical mind. They're not about finding solutions. Emotions are very primal. And so in that primal process of comparing emotions, then going back to the logical process of finding solutions, that can be really challenging, I think.
Yeah. And so what I would say is that there's like separate containers for both, because on one hand, you have to like treat them both kind of individually. You shouldn't really combine the two. It should be a very clear emotional experience and then a logical experience in my view. So what that looks like is like when the emotions are being expressed, you kind of need to clear off any expectation of finding a solution in that moment. And you'll kind of have a sense, the stronger you get with your sensing, your emotional sensing, you'll get the sense about when it's time to move on. But it's like, I like to think, imagine if you're dealing with like a 6-year-old and they're like crying. You're not going to be like, oh, well, tell me all the logical reasons you're crying. Oh, you're upset your brother took your toy. Well, listen, there's a rule called fairness, and in fairness, this is the way we do this. And listen, it's going to be really easy. And in 20 years, you'll get that. Like, no, they're just fucking crying. Your kid is crying. And
Right.
You just need to hold them and tell them that, like, it's okay. And then, like, maybe later on, and so, with talking to your partner, it's going to look like, hey, when you were crying about that thing, and I didn't really understand it, I'd like to understand it more. Do you know what was going on? What caused that for you? And then later on, you ask and invite them into that.
And I think that can be scary both for the wounded and the immature one, because then you dive right back into that crossfire, right? Especially in relationships where the emotional expression is probably uncomfortable for both at some point, right? Like, I don't want to be responsible for causing you pain, and I don't want to see you in pain, but at the same time, I might just be responsible because that's what's going on. So then stepping back into that fire of, hey, can you go back to that uncomfortable situation that was uncomfortable for you and for me, and then we talk about it. Oof. How can someone make that easier?
That's a very good question. It overall just has to do with the way that the two of you are oriented in the relationship. So for me, it's like near non-negotiable that these are things that we're going to address, because I'm just very this is like my work, first of all, and I also like know that it's at the end of the day the source of a person's healing and growth and like truest expression of themselves comes when they can begin to communicate about like their past wounds, the past things that's happened. So I suppose the way to make it the easiest is that the number one priority when it comes to talking about these types of things is safety. A person is willing to express themselves and go there if they feel safe. So there can already be problems if not necessarily your partner is the one if they can't make you feel safe, because maybe they are reminding you of a partner, that used to not make you feel safe, or reminding you of a parent. There's a lot of ways in which, like, getting outside help or finding some sort of place that you can set up safety. I mean, it may sound ridiculous, but sometimes what my girlfriend and I will do is we'll pull a blanket over the both of us and be in a fort, and the fort is a safe place where we're allowed to just express ourselves in whatever way we need to. We can speak about anything when we're in the fort, so it can look however you want, even if it's silly. It's just getting in tune with that sense of security, touching on that childlike need for that.
And as you described that too, is particularly talking about a coach like yourself, right? I really imagine there's a lot of value in having a safe space separate from your partner, right? Because if you're trying to get all your needs met just by one partner, that may just not be feasible.
Yeah, and not only is it not feasible, it's not healthy. Like, I know a lot of women that are like their man's therapist, and it's just like an unhealthy dynamic in the relationship, and it can kill like sexual attraction, and it can make you feel like you're mommying them. But there's also this strange balance where you can't really heal relationship wounds unless you're in a relationship, because that's what's triggering the wounds. So like I said, like commitments from the get-go and just being oriented towards, yeah, you know what? I think I'm willing to practice working on this with you. So finding that balance is important.
And as you bring this up too, sexual attraction, which is often based on polarity, based on separateness, based on that opposing perspective, that's what makes it interesting. But then as we're going into the, call it healing, call it emotional exchange and all of that, all of that gets, I don't know, lost, eradicated, mixed up, switched, flipped over. I mean, I just look at this and I see a dilemma in that, like for relationships in general. And based on, the research that I do around that as well, and just like listening to other speakers and therapists talk, just what appears to be reality, the situation we find ourselves in, the society we find ourselves in, just create certain dilemmas that make it extremely challenging. Possibly even there might not be any good solutions. What do you say to that? What do you think is am I expressing even the problem that I see well enough? And would you see a solution possibly for it?
Let me see if I understand. It sounded like you were saying that the dilemma lies somewhere in between, like two people's ability to maintain some sort of separateness and polarity in the relationship while also coming together and healing together.
That's a great way to put it. Yes, you described it really well. I think that is an ambivalence, a challenge of two seemingly two things that seem to not be able to combine. You know what I'm saying? So exactly that.
Yeah, well, I mean, on a philosophical level, I view it as a dance. And so it's like, sometimes the steps are quick, sometimes they're slow, sometimes, you're dancing salsa, sometimes it's, electronic or whatever. And so like, what that means is that like, during certain times with your partner, you're going to have certain like North Stars of the relationship. So perhaps in the initial stages, there's some growth and there's like, hey, like I kind of enjoy, like there's a codependency thing happening and oh man, we're codependent and have these wounds around it. But then as you heal it, there is then like a more separateness that can evolve. Like, wow, I'm my own person. I'm taking charge. So yeah, you're talking about like the dance between how do I fully own my own power as a sovereign individual and also surrender that power to the union of two. And I mean, yeah, that's the question for sure. But it's more of a dance than a solution. And dances aren't to solve problems or get anywhere. They're for the experience itself.
Love it. The way you put that is fantastic, man. Hey, Zach, if somebody's interested in continuing the conversation with you and working with you, gaining, benefiting from your wisdom and from your insights and learning how to dance better, what's a good way to get in touch with you and set that up?
Yeah, so my website, mapofmastery.com. There's a page you can contact me or a DM on Instagram at fully_aligned. Would be the best way.
Nice. And what's it usually look like working with you? Do you have different, I don't know, packages, or what can somebody expect? I mean, it's like, seems kind of weird to get a relationship coach maybe. Like, what if I don't even know what that might look like? Can you give us some insight on that?
Well, I definitely, like, I just want to, I talk to people the first time for free, obviously. I just want to see if we're aligned. So like, I want to like listen to your problem and listen to see if it's something I would even be a good fit for. But I work with individuals and couples. So with couples, it looks like a 4-week process where we're going to go through kind of a roadmap of something I call the 4 C's of a healthy relationship, where we talk about your compatibility, chemistry, communication, and commitments, and helping people unravel their dynamics and create the relationship that they really want to be in. And for individuals, I take them through kind of another similar 4-week process, just with different vocabulary, where we talk about your relationship essentially to play, purpose, and power. So helping people on kind of a symbolic level pull in, what they need in their life to either find a partner or find themselves.
That sounds not only super valuable, but also like a lot of fun and really liberating and moving people closer to the life and relationships they desire.
Yeah, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, it's the best thing anyone can do is just line themselves up with how they want to live their life. And in that, like, the whole rest of the dominoes of abundance fall for people.
Amazing, amazing. Zach, thank you so much for being on. It's really been insightful to hear your perspective on all of that. And I hope a lot of people decide to work with you, because yeah, it really sounds super healing. And if we can get more people to do that, I mean, that's just how generational a lasting change and healing happens, right? Through the individual. It starts with you.
Yep. And with the way, you know, the chaos of the world potentially right now, there's no better way than to be solid in yourself. So now's the time.
Love it. Amazing.
Appreciate you, man.
Thank you, Zach. We'll be in touch,
Absolutely.
okay? And thanks for coming on.
Yeah, peace, brother.
Have a good one.